Welcome to Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. I'm your host, Brian Gary. On this episode, host Kristina Woo talks with Sunny creator and showrunner Katie Robbins about her AppleTV Plus sci-fi dramedy series, the creative challenges of adaptation, homebots, and much more. Listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Spotify, Apple, or Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West YouTube channel. And now, Kristina Woo in conversation with Katie Robbins.
Hi, welcome back to Third and Fairfax. I'm Kristina Woo, and I'm here with the creator and showrunner of the new Apple show Sunny, Katie Robbins. Katie, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's dive right in. Did you find the book that Sunny is based on, Dark Manual? Did someone come to you with it? What was the origin story of the show?
It got sent to me by my agents, and it was sort of a strange thing when they sent it to me. So it's this book, The Dark Manual by Colin O'Sullivan, and it's a gorgeous, beautiful book. He's a beautiful writer. But I'd never written anything sort of like vaguely science fiction. And so I was like, why are you sending this to me? But then I read sort of the premise of it, and it's about this woman, Susie Sakamoto, who's an expat living in Japan, which is a country I love and have spent time in. And she's just experienced this like tragic, like kind of unthinkable loss in the loss of her husband and son in this mysterious plane crash. And I've always been like very drawn to stories of what comes after tragedy and like how people sort of survive and cope. And so within that, there was this like little kernel of that story that I was really attracted to. And Susie, this character, deals with grief and tragedy with kind of sharp elbows and like a prickly sense of humor, and trying to like keep people at bay as a way of like keeping herself from being too vulnerable. And that was something I really related to, and something that I have done in times of loss or depression or kind of other periods of sort of hardship. So that felt really like familiar to me. And then in the book, Susie has this homebot that's like living with her, and she hates the homebot. The homebot in the book is a male homebot, and they're sort of adversaries. And I was like, well, what if we sort of like flipped that on its head and made the homebot like the thing that allowed her to slowly like start to come out from within her shell. And so that was sort of like my way into the story, was like again like this idea of telling a story about like how we survive, and that like the homebot would be the thing that like strangely would like help Susie survive.
So that's interesting, because throughout the show we see sort of, as the episodes progress, we see sort of the reasoning behind why the homebots exist, what Susie's husband Masa is like working on with them, and it's to tackle loneliness. Was that also in the book, or was that something that you kind of invented more to sort of create like a different way in for you emotionally?
That was something that I kind of put into the book. I mean, into my story. In the book, Susie is definitely like a lonely, isolated person, and that was something that like I am I am really lucky. I have a wonderful husband and two great kids and friends, and yet I'm like a fairly, I think, a lonely person, and think a lot about the distance kind of between us and other people, and like being on this like journey of like trying to like find moments of communion with other people, and particularly when dealing with tragedy, dealing with mental health issues. Like I think that my tendency is to turn inward and to try to like deal with it on my own. And I think that like that is like a bad habit, and something that I am always trying to like fight, and to like seek help and to seek moments of like social interaction. And so this felt like an opportunity to kind of explore that. And also like, because I have like a big job and like two little kids who I try to like devote as much time to as possible, like I never see my friends. I haven't seen you.
It's been a while.
In a long time. Even though you're one of my favorite people. And And like, I just don't see, like, I never see my female friends. And so I was like dying to kind of write about that. And so in thinking about how to structure the series, I did a bunch of research into this concept of HRI, or human robot interaction, which is this whole field of robotics that's like really fascinating, that looks at ways of potentially using AI as these kinds of like surrogates or emotional security blankets, that when you are a person who is having trouble interacting with other people, either because of depression or self-hatred, or they've even looked at it in people with kind of early onset dementia, when it's become difficult to interact with other people, that the introduction of like an AI is potentially like helpful, because like an AI isn't going to break up with you or break your heart or die. Like it's like a little safer to interact with them. And that theoretically, in the process of like learning, like we're getting back into the habit of like interacting with an AI, like slowly you can like build up those muscles again and like return to like human interaction.
Sure.
Is kind of the theory.
Okay. I have like so many
Yeah,
questions
sorry.
for you, and I know I'll be jumping around, but what you're saying is making me like, there are now dating apps that are like, well, we can have like AI surrogates, or
Yeah.
basically like wing people talk to other people for you, so that you can basically like forego the small talk portion of getting to know each other, and then and then like the AI will then figure out if you actually should like meet up in person. So that being said, when you were doing your research and thinking about the show, like how far into the future were you thinking that this would take place? Because like I love like the retrofuturism. Like, first of all, Rashida's clothes are like so amazing, like obsessed with them. But then even like the soundtrack that you have, which is so good and so cool, or the architecture, even like the way the like phones look. How did you like? Were you thinking like, oh, maybe we're 20 years in the future, 50 years in the future, or do you just wanted to keep it vague, and you just wanted to, and make us believe like, okay, we're still in like our world,
Right,
but this is like fully integrated into society?
Yeah. So in terms of like we never wanted to like timestamp the show. So it could be that it's 5 years in the future. It could be that it's 20 years in the future. It could be that it's like today, but like sort of like a slightly alt today, was kind of the goal. And so one of the things in terms of like creating like that sort of retro future look of it, when I first created the sort of like format for the show, and we were talking, and I'd set the show up with A24, and we were talking about directors, like one of the kind of tonal comps that I kept kind of coming back to as we were talking about it was End of the Fucking World, which was the show that like I adored deeply, and like sort of straddled this line between like dark comedy and like a little bit of a thriller spine, and like deep kind of like psychological drama as well. And Sunny is like very much a genre bending show or genre crossing show. And so I kept talking about that as a reference, and they were like, oh, well, if that's a tonal reference for you, you should meet Lucy Cherniak, who had directed half of those episodes. And I was like, yeah, great. And so they set up a meeting, and she came into that first meeting with this playlist of like 1960s and 70s like Japanese pop songs. And I was like, how did you like see into my soul and like understand like what the soundtrack of this show was in a way that like I hadn't understood what the soundtrack of the show was? Like it was just, I like fell in love with her through this playlist, and it was so brilliant because we didn't, like I had said in the format that like we weren't gonna sort of say that this was like 30 years in the future specifically or anything like that. And like she had come up with this like brilliant way of like using these songs that are incredibly like emotionally resonant and that are from the past. And so like in the way that we all listen to songs from the past, like it could be now, it could be 20 years in the future, it could be whenever. And so that became kind of the guiding force in our production design and in the look of our devices and the look of our robots and sort of everything, that I think was really great. And then in terms of like the AI, like it was really fascinating because I was writing the pilot in the spring of 2020.
Okay.
During lockdown. I had like gone to Japan to do a research trip like December and January 2019 into January 2020, and then got back to start writing. And I was working with an AI consultant, Nell Watson, who was like brilliant, this like Irish AI theorist who, because she's Irish, is also just like speaks in poetry. And she was amazing, and she kept being like, okay, like this is what I think is coming, like this. And I was like, no, come on, like this is great. I'm gonna like use these like ideas to generate story, but like this is ridiculous and like science fiction. And she was like, I don't know. Or she was doing it with an Irish accent, which I won't do. And then when we were filming in Japan, ChatGPT came out, and suddenly I was like, oh, holy shit, now you were right about everything. This is really intense. And luckily, like I'd listened to her and incorporated all of this stuff and was using Sunny as like a way of sort of like exploring both the bright side and the dark side of the potential of AI. But she was right. It was coming for us.
Well, and to do that also amidst like pre and post our strike effort must have been really fascinating for you.
Yeah. I think that it like I was in the midst of production when ChatGPT came out. So like everybody I know was sending me these things, and they were like, this is the show. And I was like, yeah, okay, I don't have time to like read this. And then I got back, and suddenly like, we were in post, and then suddenly the strike happened. So I got to catch up on a lot of the things that like the potential scary elements of AI for our kind specifically as writers and our kind specifically as humans. And like so much of that was already kind of baked into the storytelling and was what I was trying to look at. But it was with even like fresher and more kind of fearful eyes. And I think that the thing about Sunny, the robot as a character here, is that like, she, in one scene, can be doing all of the things that Susie, played by Rashida, needs. Like, she is like a companion. She is able to like read Susie and like kind of figure out what her like emotional wants are in one scene. And she's cute and she's funny and she's sassy and like we love her. And that's like dazzling. And then in the next scene, suddenly she's doing something that's like pretty nefarious and makes us like really doubt her aims. And I think that like that is sort of AI in a nutshell, which is that like it offers so much promise. It can do so many theoretically wonderful things, but it is also like dark and scary, and we are at this moment as like a species like at this kind of precipice of like which direction are we going to go with this, like which pill are we going to take, because it's not going anywhere. So we have to figure out how to like coexist with it and use it to like do the kinds of good that it can theoretically do without allowing it to like subsume the things that like make us human.
Right. Well, the thing that I was really struggling with while watching the show was like, you designed Sunny to be, just as you said, so cute, so like lovable, and she's so full of expression, like her eyebrows and like the way her eyes well up when she's like feeling things and talking, that I was like, as a viewer and as someone who was probably more on Susie's character side of like skepticism, like I could feel myself falling into a trap of like thinking of Sunny as like a real person. And that is the point of her, right? She is a simulation of a companion. And then having to sort of really like calibrate my feelings towards this machine that is meant to be a friend. And so I guess to like zoom out a little bit, I'm really interested always in talking to writers about how they see adaptation and what their approach is. And it sounds like with Sunny, especially this character, you really had to do a lot of inventing, or just like it was your own creation in terms of how to like emotionally plug into the story. What is your approach? And what is your approach to adaptation? Then I guess separately which is like a different track. I would just like love to know about how you like discuss Sunny in the room, because like I get attached to like stuffed animals, you know, and they don't even talk back.
yeah, exactly. In terms of like the adaptation question, the Collins novel is again like so gorgeous and like everybody should go out and buy it and read it. It is very different from the series. And I think that, I think adaptation like totally depends on what you're adapting at what point and for what medium. And one of the things that was really exciting about this was that like I felt tremendously free to just sort of like take the stuff that was there that felt right for the kinds of themes that I wanted to explore, and to like really extrapolate from those and kind of go wild. And did not necessarily feel like beholden to hitting all of the beats of the novel, which was exciting. I think that there are other adaptations where, you know, it is absolutely the right thing to do to like be pretty literal in your adaptation, and this didn't feel like that was one of the times that I needed to do that.
Is it, and forgive me, I have not read the novel yet, but is it because like, you know, I don't know, there are novels where it's very internal, where we're in the character's thoughts, where there's like maybe not as much plot and just a lot of feeling. Was that sort of, does the book fall into that category? It sounds like maybe no, or is it very plotty? Because like I think that the reason why I love asking about like approach to adaptation is because I think it's very easy to fall into the thought process of like, oh, well, like someone already like wrote the whole thing for you, and you just gonna like rearrange or just sort of like pull out the things you like. And as you know, and as everyone who's done this before knows, that's not that simple. It's not that one-to-one. So yeah, I guess like obviously you've mentioned like how you emotionally like got into the story and where you could see it going. Did you like talk to the author? Like, was there, you're saying you had a lot of freedom, and so that can also seem really scary. I just like would love to hear more about that. I don't know, sort of just like barfed a lot of like words at you.
No, it's I'm trying to think. Like, I think that early on in the writing of the pilot, like I wanted to be able to use the story to explore these like themes of loneliness and female friendship and connection and sort of isolation. And like I was doing all of this research about like the way that is expressed in Japan in terms of like the hikikomori, which is when people like kind of self-isolate for extended periods of time, and wanted to incorporate all of these like disparate ideas into the storytelling, and also like really needed an engine that would connect Masa, Susie's husband, to what Susie was going through. I mean, obviously, like she has lost her husband and son, but basically in the book, she knows that her husband is a roboticist. And so I was like, in this moment when she is feeling so vulnerable and like dealing with the loss of her family, like there's something really interesting in adding this element where it's like, maybe I didn't really know who my husband was, and like maybe I can't actually ever know anybody. And she is again like a person who creates this kind of like emotional armor for herself and has sort of internalized this idea that like maybe at the end of the day, it is better not to ever love, not to ever let anybody in, because when you do, like you just make yourself so vulnerable. And like, I really get that. Like it is like loving people means that you have stakes, and it is great to have stakes like in writing something, but it is like terrifying to have stakes in living, because like sometimes you lose, and that hurts really badly. And so I was interested in the idea of like making even this like core love that theoretically could be this thing that like would keep her going, like even making her doubt that. And so once I sort of changed that, like it opened up and unlocked the ability to kind of like change everything and to like make the sort of driving force of the story something slightly different.
Because I do love the like who did I marry genre, but this is like the most fun, most interesting version of that thing. And also mixing it with what you're saying about like grief and loneliness. Like I really responded to seeing Susie experience grief in a very messy but also very like non-linear way. Like there would be times where, not that you'd forget what happened to her, but then you're like pulled back into this moment of like, oh right, she's lost so much,
Right.
and maybe even as like an audience member, I need to let up on this person, and certainly everyone else in her life like doesn't understand that, or
Right.
maybe they're too understanding of that.
Right.
So just like seeing all of those different avenues by which they can play out was so fascinating. And I do really love a like, I mean, the Who Did I Marry is like also like a deep fear of mine, but like
Yeah, right.
but it's like really fun to explore. Okay. Oh, right. So, Sunny.
Yeah.
You did a lot of research about AI
Mhm.
and AI companionship, but I would just love to hear more about, you know, the types of conversations that you would have around Sunny. Like, would you guys also sort of forget sometimes, like, she was like not a person, or like,
Yeah, I mean, it was both in the writing process and then in the production process. It was a fascinating thing to have a character that is not a person, and you know, within the room, like I had never had a robot, so I early on
say more about that.
So early on, like I bought like a little robot for my kids so that we could just like have, I mean, just like a
little like,
yeah, like a little toy that like honestly didn't particularly work well. We played with it for like a day and then we were like, this is not that fun. But just to like see what that would feel like to have like something in our house that was like rolling around. And so like on the first day of the writer's room, I got everybody like little robots that they could sort of like play with. And again, like not robots that do anything, like robots that are just like beep beep boop boop,
Sure.
beep beep boop boop. But just so that like we could like all experience that and think about it a little bit. And I think it's, you know, it's so interesting in that in this like constant quest, I think, to not feel quite so alone in our own heads, we as humans have such a capacity to personify. You know, it's like I name my cars, like I talk to my water bottle. I'm like, where are you? You know, like you look up in the clouds and you see faces, and you look in your cereal bowl, and like we're just like primed to see ourselves reflected back everywhere. And there have been all of these studies done about like within this field of HRI about like how low actually the ceiling is for what it takes for a human to interact with like an inanimate object. And like they've done these studies where like there are like pieces of like balsa wood on strings, like this roboticist Kate Darling has like talks about in her book, like that you all it takes is like a person like moving this like little piece of wood around, just like giving it like a little bit of movement, a little bit of animation, and people are like, oh, little piece of wood, I love you, let me take care of you. Oh, is the wood sad? I mean, it's wild, but like it just is the like what we're primed to do. And so we talked a lot about that, a lot about what level of function Sunny needed to have. I mean, by the time the room started, I'd already written the first two scripts. So like I'd found sort of like Sunny's voice. And so it was just about kind of pulling that through. But like one of the things that the show attempts to do is to like make parallels between the ways in which like friends start to like take on each other's like turns of phrase or dress or, you know, affect, you know, like Lucy Cherniak, who I was mentioning before, is our producing director. And so she and I were on set, like she directed 5 of the 10 episodes. So we were on set a lot together, and she's British. By the end of it, like I was speaking with a British accent. Noah, my older daughter, was speaking with a British accent because she had gotten it from me. I mean, it was just like ridiculous because like that's what you do. And so like Sunny over time starts to take on some of like Susie's characteristics, like takes on Susie's sense of humor, takes on like turns of phrase that Susie uses. And it's interesting because it's like that's machine learning. Like she's learning Susie's like functionality in the way that like we learn each other's functionality.
Well, one of the most surprising things that always sort of like caught me off guard was Susie and Sunny would have a scene together, and oftentimes Susie is upset with Sunny's, Sunny did something wrong. She misinterpreted whatever the case may be. And then Susie would leave the scene and Sunny would be like, shit. And I'm like, wait, but is she saying that just because Susie curses a lot? Or like, and I was like, no, she's learning how to be around her.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that was so, I don't know. I feel like in any other thing that I've seen where there is a like human robot interaction, it's either that the robot is like uncanny valley human already, where it's like you can't even tell that they're not human, or it's like a box on wheels and it's like, oh, that's so cute. You know what I mean? But like, I thought her expressing, like in those moments, I'm like, is she expressing grief or is she just mimicking? Like, is Sunny feeling something? And I think that was such a, like, what a fascinating thing to like wrap a show around.
Yeah.
Because I found myself getting really emotional when like a lot of the robots were talking.
Yeah.
Like there was that episode with the trash robot and Masa, and how he was teaching him how to like distinguish between what is important to a human and what is not, and how that is temporal and it can be different at any given moment.
Right.
And the like robot said something about like, well, I noticed that when you look at certain things and you frown, that means it's important to you because I'm seeing that like sadness is important to you. And I was just like, I was not prepared for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like it comes back to this like feeling of just wanting a sense of like communion and wanting to feel like somebody sees you and like is reflecting you back kind of through their eyes. And like, whether that's like a person or an AI doing that, like it's still disarming. I mean, when we were filming episode 9, Hidetoshi Nishijima, who plays Masa, who's just like the dreamiest of dreams, he hadn't worked that much with Sunny at that point, and they were doing a scene, and Sunny, played by Joanna Sotomura, also the dreamiest of dreams, like cocked her head and like reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. And Hide was like, I remember talking to him afterwards. He was like, I couldn't believe how much I felt for this robot. Like it was like real. And it, I think that it is astonishing, like how much we can put on these other kinds of creatures, which is also what makes them incredibly dangerous.
Exactly. Okay, I could talk to you about this for 10 jillion years, but I do also want to like zoom out a little too and talk about you and your career and your sort of career path. And also, this was your first time show running, am I correct? Okay, so I would just love to hear more about that, because this is a writing podcast after all for the WGA. And people, I'm sure, would be very interested to hear like what that path was like for you. And, can anyone feel prepared to be a showrunner? Would love to hear.
So path-wise, I was a journalist before I started doing this kind of stuff. I did like TV news and doc features and magazine and online writing, and I started in like doing more like public policy stuff, like environmental issues and education for PBS NewsHour and various other things. And then I started writing more about food because it was fun and not as depressing.
Yeah.
And then I moved to LA. And I guess like what happens to writers when they move to LA is somebody's like, oh, you should write a screenplay.
Yeah. And
that person was the person who became my manager, Aaron Kogan, who was like, have you ever thought about writing a screenplay? And I was like, no, I haven't at all. But I have this short story that I think maybe could be like something. And he was like, well, why don't you outline it and then we'll find a screenwriter to write it. And I was like, okay, sure. And I didn't know anything. So I was like, went and wrote an outline. And then I was like, oh, this is really hard. I've already done all of this work. I'd written like a 20-page outline. I was like, I'm not going to give this to somebody else to write. I'm just going to like write it.
Yeah.
And I had never like read any screenplays. I'd done a lot of theater growing up and in college. So I was like very familiar with like scripts. And so I just went and like read a shit ton of screenplays and started to figure out how kind of structure works. And I like took a friend out for lunch and he sort of talked me through like some like big picture ideas. And so then I just like wrote it. Just wrote it. It was like really fucking hard in the way that writing is really hard. But I liked it and I found it enjoyable. And then he took that script out and, you know, like anything, it didn't get made, but it got me like a lot of meetings. And I was like, oh, I really love this. Like, this is really an exciting thing. And so decided to try to like pursue it alongside of like the journalism work that I was doing at the time. And then ended up setting up some like sold an idea to Big Beach that was still around at the time. God rest Big Beach was sold. Yeah. So great. Like a TV idea that then got me agents and then got me my first staffing job on Last Tycoon with Chris Kaiser and Billy Ray. And it was like one of these wild things that like doesn't happen very often, which was like I was just an agency submission and they like happened to read my script and I got a meeting. And actually I was pregnant with my second kid at the time and really hiding it when I had my meeting with them because I was so terrified of what like that they'd be like, oh, sorry, never mind, like you can't have the job. Because I was going to like give birth like while we were in the midst of production. And so I like wore a dress that sort of like hid it and I got the job and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm going to have to like, eventually I'm going to not be like, I can't be on like Friends and carrying around like
just a big box,
just a big
winter coat.
Time. Yeah, right, exactly. So I like with shaking hands, I called Chris Kaiser. And he could not have been nicer and was like, of course, like you're a human being.
WGA
like,
King, Chris Kaiser.
Right, exactly. And he was like, no problem at all. And so I did that job and had my baby and then like brought her to set with me.
Aww.
She had this was my daughter Goldie. She had a dressing room next door to Kelsey Grammer's dressing room, which was, you know, she started life out.
Incredible.
On the high horse.
She's a star.
Yes, exactly. And then I went straight from that to The Affair, which is how I met you.
We know each other.
And then sort of that was, I mean, like that room was so incredible and like such an extraordinary group of writers that Sarah Treem like assembled and was, I don't, you know, like, I mean, I was there for the last 2 seasons and it was like a dream team. Like everybody was just like so kind and smart and funny. And just like, I looked forward to going to work every day because it was just so fun to talk about story with these people, you know, like David Henry Hwang is like, and I'm just like,
literal
what is happening?
Genius and like king of theater.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
but yeah. And then, you know, I think like through the experience of being on set, like in the amount that we were on set on that show, like, you know, I think that I got through the process of watching Sarah break story and in such an extraordinary way. And then
and you were given a lot of responsibility. I know. I just want to like make that known. You did a ton and you carried a lot on your shoulders too. And so I'm sure that experience was huge when you're like going into making your own show. Yeah.
I mean, I think by the time I got to making Sunny, and Sunny had all of its own because we were filming in like a different country, like it had a lot and with a robot and in 2 languages, like it had like, it was a big pie. But I think that I had spent so much time on set by the time I got there, both like on Last Tycoon too, as a staff writer, like they made sure that like we got to produce our own episodes.
That's nice.
And so I got to be in the edit, like on like the first episode of television I ever wrote. Like, I mean, just like shout out Chris Kaiser and Billy Ray. but I think that with the responsibility that I got on the affair, even as like a fairly junior person on that show, like I saw all of the ways that like production can be hard, all of the ways that like you have to be like nimble and agile and like be constantly triaging. I worked a lot with actors. I did a lot of prep. Like I felt like I had the boot camp necessary. I think that, you're never like, no matter what, you're never going to be fully prepared for just the immensity of the job. I think it was shocking how big it was, even with the amount of preparation that I'd had on the affair. I was still blown away by the never-ending onslaught of need and questions and like the sort of like decision fatigue that people talk about in that job is really true, because you're just constantly making decisions about everything. And I think it's really challenge and I will say that like one thing about like the model that we all sort of, some of us were lucky enough to come up in, and that like has faded, is and that like our new deal has like tried really hard to reinstate, is that like it is really important for writer producers to like have the experience of being on set and to like get your feet wet with that before you're brought in to like do the whole thing, like to shoulder the load of being a showrunner, because I cannot imagine doing that if I hadn't had the experience that I had. Even with the experience I had, it was like near impossible.
Was there anything in particular? I mean, I can't even imagine shooting in a different country. I don't think, do you know Japanese?
No.
Okay. I was like, because it's one thing to understand another language and to be directing in it and writing it. I assume you wrote in English and then had it translated.
And that was a fascinating, wild process.
I'm sure. I don't even like how to ask this question. Was there something that took you totally by surprise in this show running process that you were like, oh my God, if even one person could have warned me about this thing, I would have prepared differently. I would have thought about this thing differently.
That's such a good question. It is one of those things that it's like a little bit like childbirth, right? Like, going into childbirth that it is gonna hurt. Like everybody's like, it hurts. And you've experienced pain before. Like you've, had cramps even before that are like a similar kind of pain. You've experienced like, you've read, you've watched movies, like you think that like you have a sense of what it is, and then you have no sense of what it is. I mean, and every person's experience is different with it, but in my experience, I was like, oh shit, like this is real. And nothing could have prepared me for that. And I think show running is kind of similar. Like I had seen firsthand how hard and exhausting and overwhelming the job is. I had like talked to people. I had heard, I think it's Genji Cohen, like that it's like a pie eating contest where the prize is more pie. Like I knew it was like real, but like that and yet I was not in any way prepared for like how huge it was. And I think that like there were many elements that made my first experience of show running that much like more complicated, as you say, like being in a country where I don't speak the language, working in a show that is in 2 languages and dealing with like the translation process. It was also that like my room, like I had a gorgeous, glorious, brilliant room of writers who I adore. And I also like lost them all, before the scripts were all done. And so like I was by myself at a certain point, like churning out scripts and writing. Like I had, obviously I had their drafts, but like I was still getting tons and tons of notes. And then I had one writer producer on set with me, Ken Kobayashi, who lives in Japan, but it was still so big that like even with the two of us, like it just wasn't it was massive. And I was on set all day every day we shot for 101 days. Like the only time that I wasn't on set was when like my older daughter had COVID and we were in Japan and you weren't allowed outside. So I was in lockdown. But like then I was like in like the bathroom of our tiny like Tokyo apartment, like in like editing on Evercast because we were trying to edit the pilot at that point. Whilst also like on whatever the thing is that like lets you a Q-take, like watching
like
stuff from
dailies,
set, like and trying to like give notes. I mean, and like sitting on the bathroom floor and just being like, what is my life? And like there's the moment that I always think about in this period is like we were working on a early cut of the pilot and we wanted to add like a line of ADR like for Susie, for Rashida's character, where Sunny comes over and like puts her hand on Susie's head and Susie says, leave me the fuck alone. And like Rashida was filming, so I didn't want to like try to get like temp ADR from her. So I was like, well, I'll just record the temp to put in. And I was just like on the floor of my bathroom, like, leave me the fuck alone, leave me the fuck alone. And it was like so method because I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I like, it was a pretty good performance, I have to say. Rashida's is much better in what it is, but like I really felt like I'm just, this is too much.
Sure.
It was a lot.
Well, I'm sure, I don't know what's going on with a season 2, the future of the show. I want to shift a little bit back more towards writing.
Yeah.
Season 1 is so bonkers in like such an amazing way. Like I loved episode 9. I loved the game show concept and how that's the inside of Sunny's like it was incredible. And there's the Yakuza and there's like running around Kyoto. How do you approach a season 2 for a show like this? How do you think about like heightening even more or like going in a different direction? Like, is there anything you can say about like what you thought about like what season 1 is? And then if the show continues, like how do we keep branching out?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, first of all, thank you. And like, I think that one of the things that I feel so lucky about is that this show was allowed to be pretty bonkers. You know, I think that we worked hard to make sure that we had the like sort of Trojan horse of this like mystery thriller kind of spine that like keeps it moving, keeps it like generally like clipping at a pace and keeps the stakes pretty high so that we could earn like these kinds of like crazy bottle episodes or departure episodes and like play with tone a lot because you know I think like life is sort of like a weird tonal melange and so I'm attracted to stories that kind of are the same thing but in thinking about like the ways in which this story would go in a second season, I have been thinking a lot about like thematics. And that was sort of like the way into the first season is like, what are the themes that I want to explore that this particular group of characters, that this particular story feels like it can hold and like it can kind of shed a light on. And so that's sort of the way that I've been thinking about it is like, what are the things that I want to talk about? And then how can those be sort of like the North Star in thinking about how story kind of moves?
Maybe you can play an angry robot in season 2.
I do have one tiny little cameo.
You do?
A little, I mean, not on camera, just like a little line of ADR that in episode 10. I have a little robot voice that I laid down in the mix. Yeah, nice. It was exciting.
Well, Katie Robbins, I could talk to you for a million years.
Forever,
but congratulations on Sunny.
Thank you.
Everyone can watch it on Apple TV Plus. I guess by the time this airs, the whole show will be out, I think. So everyone should watch.
Yes, binge, please.
Is there anything else you want to like promote? I don't know. Now I'm acting like this is not my podcast, but I don't know how to end podcasts by not asking people what they should promote. I don't know.
I have another show that'll be out on Hulu in the spring, so watch that too.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Third and Fairfax. You can listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Spotify, Apple, and Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West's YouTube channel. Also check out writtenby.com, the Guild's online publication, for more on writer craft, career, and union life. And see you next time.